Everyone, welcome to the Axelerant webinar. I'm Trupti Bhosle, Technical Workforce Manager for Quality Assurance at Axelerant and your host for the webinar. So friends, we have always been working on different projects with different tech stacks and different domains like hospitality, e-commerce, education websites and whatnot. Sometimes these projects are simple, sometimes they are very complex. But as we work on these different tech stacks and different projects, there is one thing in common that we always work on. And that is the SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle, and its different phases. Phases as in requirement gathering, grooming, estimation, implementation, peer review, and the most important, deployment. So, as we work on these different phases of SDLC, we often see that there are gaps with respect to understanding of the task and the outcomes for these phases. These gaps can cause minimal issues at times, but sometimes it can cause major issues like delay in delivery, which can take an impact on the project and the team morale also. Kalaiselvan, Technical Program Manager at Axelerant, sensed this gap and decided to do a webinar for us. Kalai is a technical program manager at Axelerant since 2020 and is a seasoned developer in Drupal and PHP. In today's session, Kalai is going to shed some light on the requirement gathering phase, which is a critical phase of SDLC. So without any further ado, let's welcome Kalai.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Trupti, for a wonderful introduction.
So Kalai, I think I've almost explained the reason why we are doing this webinar. But is there any other reason that inspired you to do this webinar?
Yes. During my interactions with the teams, I have kind of felt that there are a lot of very valid questions that the team members come up with, and it is something that I felt will resonate with everyone at Accelerant, irrespective of their roles, and it also spans across whatever we do, and it applies to everyone literally. So that's one of the major reasons I wanted to take this.
Okay. I am very excited to look forward for this requirement gathering webinar and to understand what exactly has been missed. And let's head on to your presentation, Kalai, without any further delay. All the best for your presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the first part of the multi-part series of from concept to code. So let's go further. And as we saw, as Tripti explained, there are multiple phases from requirement gathering, grooming, and estimation, implementation, and deployments. I have kind of mapped to each and every phase to a question, which can be something that can be resonates with everyone, irrespective of whether they are technical or non-technical. So here I kind of have mapped requirement gathering to the why part, and it kind of answers the question of why are we doing this in the first place and what is the reasons behind we are doing this particular engagement or project or the task. And grooming and POC is kind of the how part, and how are we going to implement something, and we plan on how are we going to do it, whether it's doing a POC or doing a full-fledged grooming, and it's writing down the plan via implementation details of what we are going to do. And then we estimate the implementation details, which we have been identified as part of the grooming, where we quantify the out part also through efforts and also through the cost related to those efforts. So then we go to the implementation, which is the actual work where we implement whatever we have estimated, and then we finally deploy it to production. And though deployment is kind of the finale, it's not really the finale, right? So there can be after deployment some maintenance work, or also working on features that are kind of comes after whatever, based on whatever we deployed. However, that is kind of a cycle. After we do the deployment, we again come back to requirement gathering, and then we kind of do the requirement gathering for the new features. So let's proceed further to the requirement gathering. So as explained, requirement gathering is kind of the why part, and we when we enter the requirement gathering, we already kind of have a set of requirements that has been explained by the client, or they might have set of needs that they want to fulfill via this engagement or project, which is the primary goal of this particular engagement. right? And that is important, and that is, though that is on one side, we also have to see if we need to understand the business needs behind those requirements which the clients are coming up with, so that we kind of map the requirements against the business needs. And in order to understand the business needs deeper, it's important that we discuss and brainstorm with the clients during this phase, and also understand the entire environment or entire business landscape of them. And once we understand all the and do the business analysis, then we finally have a good understanding of the business, how we are going to add value to the business, and then we document the requirement, which is the very important part. We also have a vision, which is kind of tied up to the goal or the major objective of this engagement, and also we identify what is within that particular goal, and which is not within that, which aligns with that goal, which is the scope. So once we align on the vision and scope, we document both, and then we proceed further. So let me go to the next. So in each of these phases, we look at each of these areas, which is the entry and exit criteria for requirement gathering. Entry criteria being what are the do we start? What are the criteria, or when do we say that requirement gathering has actually started? And exit being when do we say that requirement gathering is complete? So, and we will also see who are all the roles who will be involved, and about from the team, and what will be the contributions as well, and what can we do differently in each of these phases, and so that we add value at each phase to the client as much as possible. And finally, what is the significance of each phase, and why do we need this phase, and why it's important to stick on to this phase and spend time on each of these phases. So these are the various points that we will look at in each of these phases, like I showed earlier, and this will be different for each phase. So going further, we will first discuss about the entry and the exit criteria. The entry criteria for any requirement gathering is when a ticket is created, right? So however, it might not be that case in every scenario. For example, there might be scenarios when the client sends an email asking for something new, and we will be interested, and we will also be communicating via emails. So it is important all those communications are also documented either in Jira, which is mostly what we do now. And also there are other ways to document it as well. However, it's important that we document those things, and where in this case it can be a ticket. So when a ticket is created, we can say that requirement gathering is started, and we further discuss about the requirement in the ticket itself. And the exit criteria, or when can we say that the requirement gathering is done, is that when we have written clearly the acceptance criteria or the user story for every feature or every ticket that we are working on. It can be either in the form of acceptance criteria or user story. So user story, and both can be written by anyone. User story being specifically in a specific format, as it is should be. And it is also important that we get an approved for development green signal from the client, so that we can start with the development. So the different roles involved in contributing towards requirement gathering are, it's kind of it's important that the entire team is involved here in the requirement gathering, and even in the calls, initial calls, whether it's internal or external discussions, even with the client. And the entire team is accountable for the requirement gathering. And that was also a question, who writes the acceptance criteria specifically. And the acceptance criteria is usually written by the product owner with the help of business analyst. So however, in most projects it's not like the business analyst is always there, because the requirements is not that complex to start with, or also due to budget constraints. In both cases we can get help from the QA, and we can make sure that we write the acceptance criteria for the requirements that we have got. However, the acceptance criteria is something that needs to be owned and accepted by the entire team rather than any one team member, so that we have a commitment, including the client and including the team as well, that this is the acceptance criteria or the user story that we are committing to, and we will work towards this. And looking into on what can we do differently in requirement gathering. Usually the usual way is when the project manager is more involved in the requirement gathering with the client. However, it is good that way. When we are starting, it's important that the project manager is involved, and we also establish a good relationship. However, it's important that the rest of the team is also involved along with the project manager, and they contribute in equal ways. So they also it's important that the project manager at the end of the requirement gathering also knows what is the scope that is being covered and what is not being covered, and reviews the acceptance criteria or the user story, and make sure that we are not going outside the scope that was actually aligned with the clients. So that is important from a project manager perspective. However, it's important that the team contributes in these calls, and each of them brings in different perspectives, and that contributes to the overall why part on why we are doing this, and it's important that we stick on to this phase as well. So, looking into the major significance of this phase is kind of unique to each project, because the business that we do is very unique, and it is unique to the client, and also unique to us, and we might need to come up with unique solutions that caters their business. So that is the reason it's important that we understand the business, and why are we doing this particular engagement, and how this actually helps the business as well. So it's important that we don't see requirements as just requirements or a need from the client, and we also have the context behind why this need is coming from the client in the first place, and we tie it back to the business objectives. So it can be in any way, like discussing with the client and brainstorming with them on what are the business objectives that they have, how would they like to expand their business in future, and how does this digital platform, in any way, however we are working on it, whether it's a website or app, how is this going to contribute to the client's business in the long run, in the next 3 months or 6 months. And this will help us to further enhance our understanding and also provide better solutions. And that is why it's important that you understand your why, which is very unique to you, and keep that in your mind while you transition through all the phases, and kind of come back to this why, and see whatever we are doing is aligned to this why, and it aligns to the customer's business at the end. And any software that doesn't serve customer business it's important that it serves. If it doesn't serve, it doesn't serve them actually. So rather than just fulfilling the requirements, we need to fulfill the customer's business, and that's also improves the customer's relationship in this crucial first phase of this multi-part series. Now, I am done with my presentation, and let's have Tripti back to hear her thoughts on this.
Thank you, Kalai. Thank you for sharing details about requirement gathering. I really appreciate that. If you have any other questions for Kalai, you can reach out to them on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, and we would be back with an interesting webinar soon. Until then, stay tuned and bye bye.